Hey everybody, welcome back to Photorec.tv. I'm Toby, and here on the desk in front of me, I have the Sigma 60-600. Well, I'm supposed to zoom it while I say that. The Sigma 60-600. That is a 10x zoom lens. But we need to answer in this video if it's a good 10x zoom or if it's the equivalent of taping a bunch of potatoes together. All right, let's take a second to put this 10x zoom in perspective. I have here the lovely Sony 200-600. That's a 3x zoom. The wonderful Sony 100-400. That's a 4x zoom. This one is a 10 times zoom lens. That is one lens going from 60 millimeters, fairly standard focal length. That's great for street photography, general travel, portraits, to zooming all the way to 600, a very serious wildlife and sports capable lens at those focal lengths. On all of the wildlife workshops and travels I've done, I've never taken anything longer than a 600 millimeter lens. And speaking of travel, it does manage to do this and still remain slightly smaller than the Sony 200-600, though it does weigh just a little bit more. Let's jump in to the full specs. This $1,999 lens, as I said, offers a 60-600 f4.5-6.3 with 105 millimeter filter threads. It weighs in at 5 pounds 13 ounces. That is with the lens hood on and the collar and foot on as well. That collar actually isn't removable, but the foot is. And good news about the foot, it is Arca-Swiss compatible. Yes. And back to discussing the collar, it's got really nice little catch points as you rotate it for vertical and horizontal shooting. That's nice. I appreciate those little things that just make your user experience a bit better. You also have strap attachment points on that collar, and you've got a whole host of physical switches on the side here. You've got your typical focus mode, AF, MF. You've got focus limiting switches. You've got 2 modes of stabilization, and of course you could turn it off. And you've got a custom switch that through the Sigma dock allows further customization. Things like changing focus limits or changing focus distances. You also get a focus hold button on here. That's a button that you can assign through your camera's settings. You don't need the dock for that button's customization. I have mine in most Sony cameras set to quick birds in flight. And you've got a lock switch, which lets you lock the lens not only at the lowest focal length, but at every marked focal length on the barrel. So at 60, it's really locked solid, and you have to unlock the switch to get it to move again. But at the other focal lengths, it's a lock that resists just a little bit. With a little pressure, though, you can again change the focal length. I really like that feature. It's nice. So that solid lock at 60 is going to help you avoid lens creep when walking around with this lens, because it is not an internal zoom lens, as I've already demonstrated several times. It does change in length from about 11 inches at 60 millimeters to about 15-ish inches at 600 millimeters. And the balance does change fairly noticeably as you zoom too. Now out front at the end, you have an element that needs a 105 millimeter filter. Generally, I don't use filters on my bigger telephoto lenses, but with this lens starting at a more standard focal length, you might want a filter. They are out there. They're just not very cheap. It's just something to keep in mind. Now we've got a really nice quality lens hood here. It uses the screw lock system, but it doesn't give you a little door for manipulating, say, a CPL filter. Close focusing is impressive. At 60 millimeters, you can get just 6 inches from your subject, and if you switch to manual focus, I was able to get even closer, under 5. Now let's chat a little bit about aperture. From 60 to 79, this is an f4.5 lens. From 80 to 139, it's a f5 lens. From 140 to 365, it's an f5.6. And that last little bit, I need to change that. It's not the little bit. It is almost 300 millimeters. It is at 6.3. Now, just for quick comparison, the Sony 200-600 is an f5.6-6.3 lens. That switch to 6.3 happens at 300, making the Sigma just a little bit faster for some of that overlapping range. Now, I think there's 3 reasons you've stuck around so far in this video. One is my humor. Okay. There are 2 real reasons you've stuck around so far in this video. One is you care about the quality. I mean, again, back to that opening discussion. Who cares if it does 10x zoom if it's about the same as shooting through a potato? And then there's the question of autofocus. Well, I spent some time at the local dog park doing some extensive testing of autofocus on pretty fast dogs running straight at me. And then it was like Sigma was watching me, because I received this unprompted email from Sigma. As you are aware, the advanced samples are operating on beta firmware. We have been informed that the production firmware will offer significantly improved AF tracking over the beta. Please make sure your viewers are aware of this information if you speak to AF tracking performance with the current beta firmware in your video. Okay, I wish I'd known that before I did a lot of work, but you know what? I still would have done it anyway because I'm curious to see how it's going to do. I think that's an important part of this lens, and I can't speak to how it will perform when the firmware is updated, but I can say that I found it was decent with the beta firmware. I mean, on average, it felt a little slower than the 200 to 600. And if they do significantly improve it with the updated firmware, then I expect it'll be on par or at least close to the 200 to 600. And this does make sense. This is their sport line. This is their pro level lens, and those do very well. In the past, they've been very well received, and there haven't really been focus complaints about them. But again, because I can't test or compare this lens as it will ship to you, I'd say that if you plan to buy for some fast action, I mean, birds flying right at you, sports action right at you, you get the theme here, stuff going right at you, then I would wait for a few more reviews after this lens comes out with that production firmware. But for everyone else, really, I don't see anything that worries me about focus speed. Now let's move on and talk about image quality. This is something that I don't expect to change, and I'm impressed. I was comparing it mostly to the 200 to 600 over that overlapping range, and it is very difficult to tell them apart. The Sony 200 to 600 is a very sharp lens, so that makes me happy. In my real-world examples, I never could tell what image was captured with what without looking at the metadata. They're virtually indistinguishable. In more careful testing, I do see the Sony has an edge in the center, but you always need to be looking at about 100% or more to see those differences, and that advantage is virtually gone as soon as you stop down a little bit. Interestingly, the Sigma seems to be a little bit sharper in the corners than the copy of the Sony that I had. Now, for those of you saying 600 millimeters, that's not enough. I need at least 840. Does this lens work with teleconverters? No, not the Sony mount. There are no Sigma teleconverters for Sony, and Sony's own teleconverters do not work with this lens. But this lens is also going to be sold for the L-mount, and Sigma you can own L-mount teleconverters. So I'm just thinking, at the time of this recording, that new Panasonic S5 Mark II has been released. You could pick that up, and you can get 840 millimeters or even 1200 millimeters with the 1.4 or 2x teleconverters respectively. And yes, you do get full autofocus out at 1200 millimeters. But back to Sony shooters, because that's what I'm mostly talking about here. That is a benefit of the 200 to 600. You have Sony's own teleconverters, and they do work very well with the 200 to 600, giving you that additional range if you want. Now, again, Sony photographers, you have many excellent telephoto lenses. I released a video at the end of last summer with a discussion of many of your options. I'll link that right down below. But none of them come close to a 10x zoom provided by this lens. And it does it without any real sacrifice. I mean, the downsides that I can come up with is it is heavy. I mean, yes, it is lighter probably than carrying 2 lenses in this range. Almost definitely is. But it is not a lightweight lens that many of you are going to want to handhold for too long. And with the addition of this beefy-sized lens hood, you're going to need a decent-sized camera bag to fit it all in. And yes, let's do another elbow pump. Is that what they call it? Elbow pump for this Arca-style Swiss foot built in. But it's actually kind of shrimpy. With a lens this big, I'd like to see this a little bit larger, both because as you zoom, it changes balance, and also this is nice to hold as a handle, and I can actually only get about 2 3/4 of a finger underneath of these. So, and Let's go back to that opening discussion where I said, yes, this starts at 60, which is a great travel and walk around lens. But again, one, it's heavy, and two, you are going to attract some serious attention if you're walking around shooting with a lens this size. But that's all I can really say negatively about this. And I think about pairing it with a 24 to 70-ish range. And wow, you got two lenses in your bag that give you a huge range with no gaps in coverage. I think about wildlife photographers covering everything from friendly backyard birds to shy wildlife, and you have a lens that's going to do very well for you. And that's all I have to say. I would love to know what you think about this lens or other Sony telephoto lenses, or are you picking up that S5 II and are very excited for a lens like this in that L-mount system? You can leave those thoughts right down below for me, and please, if you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button along with a little bell so you'll be notified. And what's this thing? The thumb. Do the thumb thing too, please. I really appreciate that. It helps the algorithm. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.